Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, State Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon talks about changing the culture around sexual harassment in California's capital. And the GOP tax reform plans. We'll look at their impact on your family, finances, and the economy. But first, in the nation's capital, U.S. Representative Trent Franks has stepped down over sexual harassment allegations. He is the third member of Congress to resign in 3 days, in addition to Representative John Conyers and Senator Al Franken. The developments come amid a growing movement to crack down on harassment by powerful men as the nation's political and cultural divisions widen. For more perspective on this, we turn now to a veteran journalist whose career has spanned more than 5 decades. Dan Rather has interviewed numerous presidents and reported on watershed moments in U.S. history, from the Civil Rights Movement to the Vietnam War and 9/11. Now, the 86-year-old former CBS anchor has built a new audience online. He has millions of fans on social media. Rather also has a new book out titled What Unites Us, a collection of essays on patriotism. And Dan Rather joins us now. Mr. Rather, thank you for being here.
Delighted to be with you.
Well, this week, Senator Al Franken announced he will be resigning in the wake of sexual harassment allegations. What's your response to that?
We're at a tidal change in society. And I'm not sure every man has the message yet, but every man better get the message. And I think this is, to use another metaphor, a sea change. Things going forward, not everything is going to change, but with all of this attention to well-known men and the brave women, and it did take guts for these women to speak up. But this has happened at the upper tier of the socio-economic ladder, if you will. My concern is so many women at the lower edge of the socio-economic ladder. The waitress in the diner, the woman who changes the sheets in the hotel. These women are among the most vulnerable. And it may take a while for this tidal change, as I've said, to reach down to that level. But this is a time of reckoning.
And it's a time of reckoning also in the media industry as well. We've seen major media figures lose their jobs, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose. Is there something within major network newsrooms that breeds that kind of behavior?
I think somewhat is the honest answer. Basically, the atmosphere in newsrooms reflects the atmosphere in the society as a whole. That many of the things that were taken for granted and just, quote, that's the way it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, are now, and rightly so, being exposed for what they were. But news tends to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People tend to work in close proximity to one another. And that has given opportunities for men to take advantage when they should not.
During your time at 60 Minutes, did you see instances of sexual harassment, or what would now be viewed as sexual harassment?
Well, the answer is yes. Did I see them? And I wish I had been quicker to speak up against them, and I can be faulted for that.
What did you see?
But I never saw anything approaching physical, the ultimate physical. But did some men go around trying to snap the bras of young women?
Well, Mike Wallace has said he had a habit of doing that.
Well, I can't speak to Wallace individually. First of all, he's now deceased, so unable to speak for himself. But look, this was not the norm, but it did happen, and men putting their hands on women.
All right, well, let's move on to your book, What Unites Us. In it, you do make the point that patriotism takes work. And you say, in fact, quote, it takes knowledge, engagement with those who are different from you, and fairness in law and opportunity. As a nation, how do you feel we're doing on that?
Well, frankly, I think we're doing better than we sometimes think we are. We have so much more that unites us than divides us. We have to stop listening to those voices who, for their own partisan political benefit, want to emphasize our divisions and think about what unites us. For example, we're united in the belief, one person, one vote. Now, we're not perfect in delivering on that, but overwhelmingly we believe in that. We believe in inclusion. Not perfectly so. We have our racial problems. Do we ever have racial problems? But patriotism is involved with humility. You love your country, you're willing to die for the country, but you recognize that the country can improve, that we're not perfect. Nationalism a gospel that's being preached by many people in powerful political positions is more about conceit and arrogance. So one wants to be careful about the difference between patriotism and nationalism. When I talk about what unites us, reflection of patriotism, that's one of the things I talk about.
But can patriotism be defined very differently by different people? For example, President Trump has invoked patriotism when he talks about the travel ban, building a wall, America first. Some people take issue with the NFL kneelers, saying that is unpatriotic. So is there such a thing as a unified view of what patriotism is? No,
but we need a conversation about what patriotism is. And you raised two very good points. Let's take the first, about the NFL and the people who kneel. Dissent is a very important part of who we are as Americans. It's made us what we are as a country, dissent. So with dissent, look, I stand for the national anthem. I stand with my hand over the heart. At least mouth the words. I sometimes try to sing them aloud. That's what's within me.
And what do you feel, how do you feel about the kneelers, given that that's your
perspective?
What
I feel about them is I want to listen. A kneeler can be a patriot. Some patriots stand, some kneel. I'm not saying that everybody would agree with those who kneel, but they're trying to call attention to racial injustice, particularly as they see it with law enforcement. We need to have a conversation about that. The idea that they are somehow against the U.S. military and not patriotic. This is an old political technique. It's been used against dissenters since the beginning of the country. For example, those women in the 19th century who wanted to get the right to vote for women were called unpatriotic. They were called socialist, even communist, but they were on the right side of the issue. So we always need to consider what it is the dissenters are saying. So rather than cast aspersions on them, I'm prepared to listen to what they have to say and make a decision of whether I agree with it or not.
You've interviewed every president since Eisenhower. How would you describe the presidency today compared to other presidents that you have covered?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because this is unprecedented. This is not normal. There's an effort to get us to believe, well, this is sort of in the norm with America. No, this is not normal. And increasingly I find people who see what President Trump is doing to say, listen, we're better than this and we know this. But just to use one example, no president in the history of the country, particularly a first-term beginning president, has been so much attacking American institutions. He's attacked the institution of journalism. He's attacked the judicial. He attacked it. His whole, we've never had a president this way. Even President Nixon, who had some tendency in this direction, was not this way. That President Trump's whole being, his whole way of operating is to never apologize, never try to explain, attack, attack, attack. And this is unprecedented in American history.
President Trump has made much of fake news, right? You are, and many of us in journalism, even us here at KQED, have been approached by different forces trying to perpetrate fake news. And you started a digital news site called News and Guts. How do you and your staff go about keeping journalism relevant during this very fragmented era, and also at the same time trying to ferret out fake news and avoid being tricked?
Well, it's always a danger of being tricked, and I'm glad you mentioned newsandguts.com, which is an internet site in which we're trying to do quality journalism of integrity. We try to be on the alert. We try to check things out. You know, there's an old journalism adage, you trust your mother, but you cut the cards, which is a way of saying you check as much as you can. But look, those who seek to perpetrate fake news have a lot of techniques, and nobody can consider themselves absolutely impenetrable. But with News and Guts, we do the best we can. By the way, on the subject of fake news, President Trump talks a lot about fake news. He himself is the source of a lot of fake news. He is a fake news machine in many ways. So when he is constantly, any news he doesn't like, he immediately calls fake news. He has to be called to account for these things. And now we're talking about established facts. For example, he says, well, I had the biggest crowd for the inauguration in history. It's demonstrably untrue. It is, in his phrase, fake news.
And since we're on this topic, I have to ask you about this. You in 2004, you reported that former President George W. Bush had received preferential treatment during the Vietnam War because of the clout of his father. There were questions about the authenticity of the documents used in that report. You lost your job as CBS anchor shortly thereafter. Were you tricked during that time?
No. And let's see clearly what happened. The story we reported about a young George W. Bush was true. Fact one, his father's influence got him into the so-called Champagne unit of the National Guard. This is a fact. Fact two, after being in the National Guard for a while, he disappeared for a year. You don't disappear in the U.S. military. Never explained. Now, to this day, neither George W. Bush nor anyone close around him has denied that those things are true. They were in an election campaign, realizing that we had a true story. We reported the truth. They attacked it for the process by which we got to the truth and centered on the documents. What's the purpose of journalism? Journalism is to get to the truth or as close to the truth as humanly possible. You can fault us for the process by which we got to the truth, but don't try to call attention away from the fact, and it is a fact, that we reported a true story.
Let's look ahead. According to some polls, many Americans feel our best days are behind us. How do you feel as you look to the future?
I don't believe it for 1 second. Our best days are not behind us. This is part of my own optimism and hope, which I try to reflect in What Unites Us book, is there's plenty of reason to be optimistic if we do what we need to do as citizens, which is to be informed, to be involved, to be active, to organize, and to get to the polls. Because ultimately, if you want to change the direction of the country, change the leadership of the country, revenge is best served at the ballot box.
Well, you have been such a legendary journalist for so long. It's been our pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Jenna.
Dan Rather, author of What Unites Us.
Thank you.
In Washington, the House and Senate are working on reconciling the differences between their tax plans. Both include a big tax cut for corporations that Republican leaders say will spur economic growth. But key differences remain to be ironed out on state and local tax deductions. The plan's impact on California is uncertain for now, although tech giants like Apple and Google may stand to gain the most. To look at this further, I'm joined by KQED politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos, and also Chris Thornberg, a founding partner at Beacon Economics and the director of the Center for Economic Forecasting at UC Riverside. Welcome to you both.
Pleasure to be here.
Chris, as an economist, what do you think the impacts will be of these tax plans?
Well, there's two sides of the impacts. There's the distributional side, and then there's what I would call the overarching impact. In terms of the overarching impact, what you have here is a bill that is cutting taxes more than it's cutting deductions. So on net, it's broadly stimulative. It's not like any sort of fiscal stimulus you might use in the context of a downturn, but of course we're not in a downturn, we're in a full employment economy. So it will heat up the economy a tiny bit, but at the same time, it will probably force the Fed to go ahead and turn around and raise rates. Now, there's a distributional side of it, which is a little different, because, of course, most of the cuts that are occurring are for capital owners. So this is going to broadly benefit the top 1%, people who own a massive amount of equity within our economy. And, of course, in turn, they're raising taxes largely on what I would call the upper middle class, people who itemize deductions, things like your interest or your local taxes. These families will end up paying a little bit more, and everybody else is going to get a few $100 because of the increase in the standard deduction.
So basically, the lower income class, the middle income class, they're losing, and the top earners gain the most?
No, actually not. I would say the bottom 80% will see a small deduction in their taxes because the standard deduction is getting raised up. The people who itemize, those kind of folks who make their money off of human capital, doctors, lawyers, consultants, they're going to see their taxes go up. But then the top 1%, they're going to become fabulously wealthy because of a big drop in corporate taxes that's going to make their earnings that much higher. So it's kind of a donut, if you will, where the 1% is taking a bunch of money for the next 14%, and everybody else is getting a few $100 in the process.
And then, Marisa, a lot of governors, Democratic governors, are worried about this. Mayor Jerry Brown, in fact, has called to this in his plans, the tax plans. Governor Jerry Brown calling them evil in the extreme, calling it basically a transfer of wealth from predominantly Democratic states to predominantly Republican states. So when we look at this, what will be the impact on city and state governments?
I mean, I think like a lot of things in this plan, it's the longer term impacts that are probably more troubling, right? In the short term, you might see as Chris said, some people lose, some people win. But there's a few things here that I think it will hurt. We're in a housing crisis in California. Part of the, at least House bill, is to eliminate a housing credit that is used for low-income development. That's going to hurt a lot of things already in the pipeline. And then more generally, as we know, what's upper middle class in another state is more middle income on the coast here in California. So I think that those are people that might get hit, and that means that when local and state governments go back maybe for tax increases in future years, that the electorate might be a little bit more hostile to that. And then we don't know what the outcome of this will be in terms of what kinds of programs, welfare programs, other social programs the Republicans then try to cut to make up for this huge deficit that they're going to create in the out years.
So, Chris, given what we know right now, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the, deductions on state, local, and property taxes. You seem to be saying that for the average California family, though, that's not going to be as big a hit as people have been saying.
Because look, most Californians don't itemize. So it doesn't matter to them. They're going to see an increase in their standard deduction, and that's going to lower their taxes. They're going to be better off. Now, some of those families who have health care expenses, they're going to be hurt. So there are specific pockets. But again, I go back to this idea that, they like to say that politics is really the 1% versus the next 19%, and the other 80% are kind of irrelevant. And this is that kind of battle between those two groups right now. And really overall what this is really sticking the finger in the eye of what they would call the liberal coastal elites. Because there's so many cherished programs from alternative energy tax credits just getting thrown out to even taxing tuition waivers for graduate students at universities, which was in the House plan, which is mind-boggling that you would actually do that. But this is about political payback. This is not about fixing our broken tax system, because it is broken.
But it also seems about giving a gift to corporations. Like, that's a huge tax cut to 20%.
Absolutely.
Is it going to boost the economy and have the stimulating effect that Republicans claim it will?
The answer is absolutely not. And here's the reason. First of all, you've got to take a step back and realize that while it is true the statutory rate on corporations is 35%, the effective corporate tax rate right now is 21%, which, by the way, is the lowest it has been in 40 years. Outside of recession periods.
When you say the effective tax rate,
that's what they're actually paying. Because the problem in our corporate tax system, well, that's just it. We have a tax system that is now a patronage system. We have a 35% top rate, and then your company goes out and pays a lobbyist to go and give your industry special perks. This is why companies like GE pay no taxes. So in a sense, as opposed to reforming the tax system, which is to say to lower the overall rate but then get rid of glaring loopholes to make it flatter and fairer and lower, instead they're just willy-nilly cutting the taxes and instead going after, again, the upper middle class along the coasts in order to pay some of that money back. It's not going to increase business spending. The relationship between effective taxes paid and actual corporate investment is there, but it's tiny and nowhere near enough to create enough economic sort of growth to pay this back.
We're not going to get that 6% economic growth that Trump claims we may see.
It would be very hard to see a noticeable bump in the growth rate.
Okay, and let's talk about the political ramifications as well, Marisa, because we have 14 House Republicans. How did they vote on this bill, and what are the pressures on them at this point to try to get some changes in there that might benefit California?
Yeah, so we had 3 Republicans vote against this. Tom McClintock from Sacramento area, Darrell Issa from down in San Diego, and now I'm forgetting the third.
Rohrabacher.
Dana Rohrabacher from Orange County. These are all folks who are seen as very vulnerable, or at least Issa in particular. And so I think that they looked at some of this stuff, the deductions for state and property taxes, the issue, of course, of writing off your mortgage payments, and looked at the political leaves and went, it's not in my best interest, especially for someone like Issa or Rohrabacher in these very high-cost areas, to vote for this. Now we're seeing a little bit of a splintering even among the other 11 members who did support it. Steve Knight from Palmdale, for example, has asked for an increase in some of these deductions. And I think that, they seem confident that they can get there. I mean, ultimately, as Chris is saying, taxes are complicated, and on an individual level, this may not hurt as much as Democrats are painting it to for individual families. So I do think that there is some risk, but they're not going to feel it before next year's midterm elections.
All right, well, there's a lot of scrambling to be done over the next week or so. They want to get this to the president's desk by December 22nd before everybody goes home for the holidays. So I know that you both will be watching it. Marisa Lagos, thank you very much. And Chris Thornberg, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Turning now to Sacramento, where there's continuing fallout over sexual harassment allegations. This week, State Assemblyman Matt DeBobne was named in a formal complaint of sexual harassment. Lobbyist Pam Lopez filed the complaint. She was on our show only a few weeks ago describing what happened to her.
I was walking into a public restroom, thought I was alone, opened the door to walk into the restroom, felt a body rush up behind me, slam and lock the door, and I spun around, and by the time I had turned around, I was face to face with a sitting legislator who had unzipped his pants and exposed himself and was masturbating. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what do I do? Don't make a scene, but be very clear that I don't want to be here. And so I said over and over again, no, I will not touch you. No, I will not touch you.
We talked to Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon about what he thinks should be done to change the culture at the Capitol. Scott Schaefer sat down with Speaker Rendon earlier.
Speaker Rendon, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
So much going on in Sacramento and the country, not the least of which is the sexual harassment scandal that is sweeping not just Sacramento, but the country. We've seen one assemblyman resign. We've got another stepping back under some serious accusations, another state senator under investigation. How did it get to this point?
Well, it's clear that we have a crisis with respect to sexual harassment, not only in our building in Sacramento, but also in the culture in general.
Well, is it a surprise? I mean, were you shocked? Because there's this whisper network, right, that people talk about members and staff and who's a problem. I mean, did you not hear any of those things?
Well, I did recognize when I took over the speakership, I realized that our policies and procedures, for example, were outdated. They hadn't been updated in about a decade. We actually didn't have policies and procedures in the State Assembly for dealing with sexual harassment until 1993. So I certainly knew that we had work to do.
One of the things that triggered all this is a letter that was sent out and signed by initially 140 women in the Capitol and people in politics. And among the people who signed that letter was your wife,
right,
Annie Lamb. What did she teach you about sexual harassment, and why did she sign that letter?
She talked to me a lot about things that she has experienced herself in the Capitol, but also things that...
At the Capitol?
Well, in the Capitol community. I don't know specifically if they were in the building. She talked about things that she'd experienced, but also experiences that other women have communicated to her as well.
And is this something, I mean, a lot of times women need to bring the men along. I mean,
right.
Was that, does she teach you something that you didn't know?
She teaches me a lot. In general, she's always sort of informing me about different perspectives. And to a large extent, she helped to, whereas I think I was focused on our policies and procedures and all of those types of things, she helped to sort of bring them to life by telling me sort of real stories that real people had experienced.
Matt DeBobne, the assemblyman who has been accused of some really egregious things by lobbyists up there, Pam Lopez. You have not called on him to resign. Why not have him resign?
Sure. Well, the allegations were made this week, were made public this week, so I appointed an independent law firm to investigate these claims. In the meantime, Mr. DeBobne has been relieved of his duties as banking chair, and we're going to go forward with the investigation.
Let's talk about taxes, and specifically the Republican tax plan making its way through Congress. Jerry Brown the other day called it evil in the extreme. It seems to target blue states like California with relatively high taxation rates. What are your concerns about the impact that some version of that bill that ultimately gets signed could have on California?
I was with my parents on Monday night, and my dad was talking specifically about the impact that it will have on him. My dad's a retired veteran. My parents are like a lot of retired folks are on fixed incomes. This is anti-veteran, it's anti-student, it's anti-homeowner. As you said, it's going to have an undue impact on California, on New Jersey, on New York, on a lot of the so-called blue states.
One of the possible impacts, of course, is that people will no longer be able to take the state and local tax deduction on their federal returns, which essentially makes taxes in California more expensive.
Well, we have a lot of concerns. First of all, we know we're a donor state. We don't get back what we pay to the federal government, and this will just compound that.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, you know, there's always tension between Republicans and Democrats, but up in Sacramento, it seems sometimes the tension is between the Assembly and the Senate, both of which are run by Democrats.
Right. We talk a lot in Sacramento about the divisions between Democrats and Republicans, the divisions between progressive Democrats like myself and moderate Democrats, the divisions between North, South, East, West. But it's important to think about all that we've accomplished. We have the 5 most progressive gun bills in the history of the United States came out of our legislature. The 5 most restrictive tobacco bills in the history of the United States came out of our institution the past couple of years. $15 minimum wage, farm worker overtime, our climate change battle. So we've done a lot. The
state Senate, of course, is led by your counterpart, Kevin De Leon. He is jumped into the race against Dianne Feinstein. You haven't made an endorsement in that race yet. Do you agree with him that it's time for someone new? Do we need fresh blood in the Senate representing California?
I'm not sure. I haven't talked to either candidate about the race. I obviously worked with Senator De Leon, and he and I have accomplished quite a bit together. Whether or not it's time for new blood in the U.S. Senate, I'm not sure.
Different styles, the two of you.
Certainly different styles, for sure.
Yeah. The other race you've have endorsed in is the governor's race. Jerry Brown, next year will be his final year. You've endorsed one of the dark horses in the race, John Chung, the state treasurer, who most people say doesn't have a great chance of winning. Why have you endorsed him? Well, first of all, John has been was a great member of the Board of Equalization, fine controller who really in that position stood up to Arnold Schwarzenegger like nobody else did at that time. Fantastic member, a state treasurer as well. John, incidentally, is a great personal friend of mine and has been for a long time. I think he would be a great governor. What do you think are the qualities that are needed in the next governor, and in what ways are you going to miss, if you are, Jerry Brown being in the governor's office? In terms of missing Jerry Brown, I hope the next governor can talk about philosophy as much as this governor has. You're a fan of philosophy.
That was my PhDs in political and aesthetic theory. The governor and I always talk about the fact that he reads philosophers that have been dead for about 2,000 years. I tend to read living philosophers. I think the next governor is someone that has to be progressive. I think the next governor is someone who has to really understand a lot of the struggles that everyday Californians go through on a daily basis, and that's why I'm supporting John. And you have time to read philosophy these days? My wife and I always talk about the fact that no matter how busy I am, no matter how difficult things are, I read 2 hours a day, usually an hour in the morning, an hour at night. If there's anything I'm devoted to and religious about, it's making sure I get my reading in every day. Well, I'm sure being philosophical helps in your job. Speaker Anthony Rendon, thanks for coming in. Thank you.
And that will do it for us. For more of our coverage, go to kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.